Once upon a midnight jury, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, which I coded, error trapping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of testing, gently flapping I could not ignore. "'Tis some insecure," I muttered, tapping at my logic for buffer size and nothing more. Which means this week we talk with Ashish Rajan about what modern cloud designs and DevOps trends bode for the future of security champions and security tools. In the news segment, malware in a popular NPM package, spaced out headers in Node.js, out of bounds in a squirrel sandbox, APESEC in videos, and more. Watch for ravens and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Whether you need to manage bots, protect cloud applications at runtime, stop formjacking attacks, or secure your web applications and APIs, only Imperva offers a unified solution to protect from edge to application and data in one tool. Imperva helps you achieve more, save money, and become more efficient with fewer security vendors needed. Start a free trial today to easily protect your apps and website with Imperva. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Imperva. Contrast Security enables organizations to secure their applications from development to production. By embedding security sensors within software, Contrast automatically and continuously detects vulnerabilities in both custom and open source code while developers write code, providing them with context-specific how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast remediation. At the same time, by identifying only true vulnerabilities that pose risk and eliminating those that do not, Contrast empowers developers and security teams to prioritize and focus on only those vulnerabilities that matter. Learn how Contrast can help you secure your applications from development through production at securityweekly.com/Contrast. Is your mobile app really secure? New vulnerabilities pop up every day, and malicious actors look for easy targets on app marketplaces to exploit. Securing your app's valuable IP and data is critical. GuardSquare's security solutions are built for developers and protect your app at every stage in the development lifecycle. Multiple layers of protection prevent reverse engineering and automatically detect tampering, making your app a difficult target for attackers. Learn more at securityweekly.com/GuardSquare.
This is episode 171, recorded October 25th, 2021. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe and the person of John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Thank you for knocking on my chamber door. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. It's the last episode we get for Halloween, so we have to be extra spooky for today. Speaking of spooky things, I'm sure InfoSec World 2021 will be spooky because they're proud to announce their keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on digital pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2021 to register now. Ashish Rajan is the host of the wildly popular Cloud Security Podcast, a CISO, and an outspoken leader on all things cloud security and DevSecOps. He is an early-stage investor, mentor, SANS trainer, and a frequent contributor on topics related to public cloud transformation and its associated security challenges. Hello, Ashish. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Thank you for having me here. Really nice to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to chat with you. We're going to get into some of the cloud security podcasts in a little bit. We also have a little bit of a teaser. We want to talk about security champions and the future of security tools, and to add a little bit of foreboding and foreshadowing. Some of the tools may die, but while our listeners worry about which of the tools are going to die, give us a little bit of background about yourself, and and what the Cloud Security Podcast has done, and what brought you here.
Sure. Happy to do that. And by the way, I love the fact that you have the Halloween theme going on with the application security tools as well. Like, something's going to die, so I'm not going to spoil that. But for people who don't know, Cloud Security Podcast is a weekly live stream podcast where we talk about cloud security challenges and how cybersecurity professionals around the world, from companies like LinkedIn, Netflix, Microsoft, Amazon, some of the guests we've had in the past so far, how they solve some of the problems in cloud. And that's pretty much what we do. We also have a YouTube channel where we kind of try and create some cloud security content. Basically, the goal is, if you're thinking about cloud security, you should be landing on the cloud security podcast page. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job. My team's not doing my job. So that's kind of the mission statement at the moment.
Well, hopefully, as I guess we'll be missionaries for your mission statement to help talk about cloud security today. And one of that would be, we were teasing at the beginning, security champions are changing in an online world. And what does the cloud designs, what does the emergence of cloud first or cloud native? I'm trying to get all the cliches out here so we can talk about more interesting things for the rest of this time. But I guess maybe let's start off with what is different with the cloud that makes you think, or that makes you say we have to rethink what security champions look like, for example?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge that we've found, especially after I was going to say post-COVID. It's not really post-COVID yet. We're still in the middle of it. But I think the security champion program earlier was a lot more easier. It has its challenges, but at least it was easier to kind of have a lunch and learn session, which is in person. You could see that Joe on the corner was definitely not interested, or Mike was just here probably because how amazing the hat is. Like, I think it used to be a lot more easier to gauge who could be a long-term cloud security champion member versus having those conversations on off the hook kind of conversations. But in an online world where all of us are working remotely, our threat models have been flipped. Now, internal threat has the same kind of rating as an external threat. In that kind of world, finding security champions is even harder, specifically because everyone gets to be behind a Slack or a Teams kind of a group. How do you identify, especially if you move into a new company, which is kind of what I did in the beginning of the pandemic. I moved into a new role, and it was really interesting trying to even think about how do you find security champions in an online world, especially if you're new in a company. And because I guess earlier you had the context of you get into a company, people start introducing you, you get introduced to other people like, hey, this is the development team. By the way, this particular developer has a security future in mind. They would definitely want to talk to you. But how often do you get to do that in a large scale company? So in the online world, I definitely see challenges as identifying security champions. Keeping them engaged is probably the second one I would call out, because in an online world, I'll be honest, it's not the same, because I could just be checking my email over here in the background and you've no idea. And I'm just like, lunch and learn is actually checking email.
Sorry, pausing there as I was actually checking my phone to see what just trying to help you prove the point. But I think you're right. And what's interesting is that I do think the online expectations about everybody is just a video chat or a Slack message away does sort of help flatten access, if you will, to get to and interact with security champions. But you still make a great point about who's actually paying attention, and are they, is there an education, is there a communication happening here, or is just somebody just passively listening and it's going out in one ear, out the other? But that also sets us up with the idea that, who would be the security champions? And I'm going to posit that the security champions, I think, makes the most sense to come out of your DevOps team or your DevSecOps team, because they're the ones writing the code. They're the ones responsible for security, and possibly they're the ones putting security tools into their CI/CD pipeline. But possibly it also sounds like not every tool needs to go into that pipeline. Not every tool is maybe serving that DevOps community or that DevOps team as well as it should be. So what's this? What's the murder, the mystery we have to solve of the dev tool here?
Oh, all right. So if you're gonna do a public slaughter, I'm gonna talk about SAST. Then static code analysis is gonna, in the true Halloween theme, gonna die. If it doesn't change. And I'll probably call out the reason why. In my previous gig as a senior security leader, I did the mistake of including, actually exactly your point, because security champions are found in DevOps world and they're the ones writing the code. The last thing they want, when they've been talking to the entire company, how quickly they can go into production. They've been deploying to production 15 times a day. And then you introduce a static code analysis tool, which requires you to sometimes upload your code onto a random endpoint on the internet. So you upload your sensitive code that someone has written onto a random point on the internet, and you wait for someone to come back before you can go into production, sometimes which could take up to 12 hours. That's not acceptable in a DevOps world. Then if you go into the other territory, which, by the way, we have been doing for years, and somehow we have accepted that this is a SaaS thing, that it will always have false positive. And I'm not sure why, as a community, we as security folks started accepting it. So I feel that this is kind of where I would like to, if I could, I don't know if I can say this, but I think SaaS as a tool is going to die where if they continue to go down the same path in the DevOps world. And especially when people know that we're all moving into a cloud, we're all moving into DevOps, we all want to do automation, get to the market as quickly as possible so we can stay ahead of our competition. SAST as a tool cannot sustain their existence any longer, or at least for much longer.
No, definitely. I think, what's interesting more to me, I think, is sort of the why is it going to die, and how can we prevent it? Or in the spirit of Halloween sequels, how can we get Revenge, Son of SAST, Rise of the SAST, Return of the SAST, and so on. But I suppose one of the things you were hitting very, very strong out of the gate is just false positives. Why are we accepting of this? And some of it could be, I'm going to guess, is that the APESEC industry, InfoSec industry, doesn't have necessarily a good track record, especially if we look at something like the OWASP top 10. It's been pretty stagnant. There hasn't been much shift in getting rid of some vulnerability classes. And if we're introducing SAST that for security people to run, it doesn't seem like that's been solving things very well or particularly well. And this is where I try to look to other inspiration. So real quick, something like the Let's Encrypt project. And I think I've mentioned this before on the show, is that if we as an AppSec industry say everybody should have HTTPS should be everywhere, the OWASP top 10 approach would be, here are the top 3 reasons why TLS is bad. And the AppSec team responsibility would be, here's a checklist for how to deploy TLS. But Let's Encrypt came around and actually solved the problem, said, your certs are going to be free, so you don't have to worry about it with budget. And here's your Acme protocol to be able to actually manage it. So we're actually going to solve the engineering problems that DevOps team has. So if we go back and try to talk about SAST and how SAST might survive to the end of this segment, what then would be a better SAST for you? Or is there something that's salvageable within the smoking corpse, unfortunately, that if we're looking at SAST?
That's a good question, and I think there is a possibility of it. The revenge of the SAST happening. And some people have started talking about this already, and I think people in the industry are recognizing that, hey, a lot of the times when you kind of go into a static analysis conversation, instead of just doing pattern matching or a regex check, instead of focusing on that, if you start with, say, I think there's AST is the format called, or there's a couple of examples. I was going to say, GitHub has recently bought a tool for this as well. Now they call it code scanning. SemGrep is another example where these are open. By the way, SemGrep is open source. GitHub charges money for this. So whichever one you want to go down the path of, but essentially they're not doing pattern matching in terms of using the regex. Instead, they allow you to define what you want to search as a pattern. Now, whether that's searching for a secret in your code, or whether it's searching for something that you may have identified as part of your pen test exercise, you're able to search that as a query across the board and call it out as someone who is doing, say, making a change or about to create a pull request. You can have a pattern recognized, or I keep saying pattern, but essentially it's just basically you're calling out, if you see this kind of description, it's a bad pattern to stick with. So keep an eye out for this. Instead of saying, I'm going to write a complex regex, which will be filled with false positives, because the variable that I declared on the job was, I changed the name for it at the bottom, and my SAST tool cannot recognize the fact that, hey, even though the text looks different, he did the right thing by describing the variable up ahead in the front. So maybe complexities like this can be solved by more of the AST kind of tools, which GitHub is recognizing there's a space for, and open source tools like SemGrep are also recognizing, where what we're really worried about, to be honest, is if someone was able to identify secrets, which is probably everyone knows about, whether it's a cloud secret, AWS secrets, Azure secrets, Google secrets. That's probably one secret that we really care about, that we don't want to go into production, or at least in github.com or any of the public code repositories. The second one being, if there is a known vulnerability that we are aware of in our code, we should be able to search for it and fix it. That's kind of like the new future for SaaS. Instead of running a tool which runs for 40 minutes, probably gives you 10,000 false positives, and then you're basically with a red face in front of your DevOps team, that who's going to look at this? Are you going to look at it, or am I going to look at this?
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, because I think that the goal here isn't to resuscitate some tool that's dying just because it's has poor quality, has no quality. Any tool, SAST, DAST, what have you, just let it go. Where the value comes through, I strongly agree with what you were saying. For me, I just want to be able to do some basic linting of my code base, so there's a consistent style so that other developers can read it and understand quickly what is this code doing, because we spend obviously more time reading code than we do writing it. And the other thing for me is just give me that SAST tool to be able to walk the AST, grep it with a SemGrep or a code QL like from GitHub that just says, like you pointed out, here's a pen test finding, here's something from our bug bounty. How can I recreate an automated check to find that one particular instance? And then how can I reuse that automated check to go search through the rest of my code base? And if a SaaS tool is going to solve that problem for me, then I get some value out of it. And that's going to be a tool that I want to put into my toolbox, not the one that I just sit down and kind of wait and go listen to the latest cloud security podcast episode while I'm, waiting for that scan to finish.
Yeah, of course. And I think I love the point that you mentioned, that linting is probably the right word for it, because that's all. You don't really want everyone in development team turn into a security expert. That's not the point being a security champion as well. It's the point that if there's a known, I guess, bug that we're aware of, we should be able to help them identify that. And then as part of that automation, it's already part of the tool. So anyone new coming into the team as well gets kind of recognize, hey, why is that there? They get to learn about it. In a way, you're expanding the reach of your security champions program by making people curious about what's this linting test, because everyone gets linting, but the moment you say security testing, they're like, oh, I don't know what this is going to be. This is going to be really complex. I'll probably call Ashish or probably Mike or John or someone. I'm sure they would have ideas, but I have no idea. But if you say linting, oh, I know what linting is. I think that's a good idea.
No, absolutely. And it's sort of like for you Hellraiser fans out there, linting or SaaS is sort of demon to some, angels to others. But I think since we've got you here, Ashish, you're also a CISO. And I want to ask you too, and it is a question here. The question to set it up a little bit is sort of, it's about budget. And I'm kind of curious where your budget goes in terms of security, because you gave us a little bit of a hint that you invested into SAST once and it perhaps wasn't the best feedback for you. And I think we might get some opinions from John onto this one as well. But if I just gave you, here's a budget for X, for some security tooling or some security improvements to make to your environment, where does SAST go into that? Or, what are there tools that bring in value, or what are some activities that you might do to finance?
That's an awesome question. And I think based on my learning from the past, I definitely would not go down the path of calling SAST first, unless it's the linting method that I'm going for. But even then, I feel like it's a bit too much to start off with for a lot of people sometimes, especially depending on the organization. If the organization has not been accustomed to, say, this kind of security tooling before, but I normally find the easiest conversation to start with is software composition analysis. That's the easiest to understand. It's easier to explain. It's easier to talk about, hey, you're using a library which potentially is vulnerable, or you're using some kind of license which is not a license we should be using in our code base. Like, those kind of conversations are an easy start to start introducing the organization to what could security look like in the code perspective, which is beyond pen testing, that everyone's forced to fix what does it look like to improve secure code? What does it look like for like a secure software development lifecycle to look like? So I'll probably put my money first in a SCA tool, and then start looking at doing some security champion programs. And this is, by the way, when I say security champion program, I do want to call it out. I don't think it's the job of the developer to do security, although it'll be amazing if they take some responsibility. But I think the idea behind there is giving them enough guidance and education that they're able to make the right call. And say at a certain point, you're able to kind of introduce these AST kind of tools from CodeQL or SendGrep and be able to go, hey, these are some of the patterns that came in. Maybe we should start introducing it into the automation tool and see where we land or how far we could go with this.
No, it feels a little bit.
Go ahead, John.
It feels a little bit like we're doing a game of, obviously not protection poker, but some sort of like a form of like APESEC poker, right? It's like where you're saying not so much from a threat model point of view of saying this is where I want to put my money to defend, but from a point of view of these are where I want to put my money on what tools I want to use in the application, or to security application, which is actually sort of an interesting thought process.
I think there's. I'll let you finish your thoughts, sorry.
Oh no, what I was going to say is I think, so I see some value I'm thinking, take a step back and think as a consultant a little bit. And I don't want to run a SAST every time. And I think this might be a little bit what Mike does day to day, just to take a wild guess, but like maybe occasionally just sort of poke through the code and see if like, are things still being done well? Is there ongoing decent level of maturity happening and organization of the code? So it's not something so much I want to run a tool at every commit or every build and have that overhead that we've talked about, but there's still some value. I think the question is, where do you run it in the overall process or at what time?
I think so. And I'm just to quickly add to that as well. I think you asked a good question about the threat part piece as well. The reason I kind of went with the money being put into, I guess it's the analogy that I would use is instead of me fishing with someone else, I'd rather teach them how to fish kind of a thing. That's kind of where the analogy came in from. And I think that for me, I found in the past that sometimes when you start a threat conversation, in general, like we're talking, obviously I'm ignoring cloud security and all the other things that people have to solve, SOC and compliance and everything. If we were to just purely focus on application security, what I normally find is when you talk to an engineering manager who may or may not have had a great experience with security in the past and may have worked with a traditional SAST tool in the past, they normally just roll their eyes. And every time you say, hey, we want to start doing some secure coding, what do you think? And they're like, oh my God, here we go again. This guy is going to talk about this amazing tool and you're going to be stuck in this, and then you're in this conversation with going around circles just to even get going. I think that's kind of where I found that SCA or software composition analysis seems to be an easier pathway because they understand that. And unfortunately, when people talk about DevSecOps, a lot of the conversations always start with an SCA. So they've been kind of like introduced to that concept just through osmosis as well. That's kind of where it came from. But what you said, if you were like taking a step back and if the budget was the question, first thing probably look at the threat for sure. Don't just jump into application security. You want to close your internet-facing assets first, I guess.
Yes, and that's an excellent point. That it's not in none of this are we positing that suddenly you buy a tool and you either quote unquote are DevSecOps compliant, or you buy a tool and deploy it and suddenly your application is secure. Tools are meaningless from that perspective. Where their meaning and value comes from is really kind of a lot of the unspoken areas or the subtext of what you and even John just now was mentioning as well, is that a lot of this conversation, which I think is really good, is focusing on the developers. A lot of what you were describing, Ashish, is starting with SCA because it is an easier way to build collaboration and build trust with the developers because you're demonstrating, here's a security tool. It's pointing out some hopefully very obvious issues, meaning and valid issues is the other word I'm going for here, in the sense of you're a patch level behind, you're a security patch behind. So just update this dependency, and ideally with something like GitHub Dependabot, you can even just have that pull request waiting for you to automatically hit merge and move on. The problems with something like SAST, or the problems with just any tool if you're deploying it because we're supposed to do this because it's part of an APESEC checklist, or this is just what APESEC teams do, that loses the sense of the value, or loses the sense that this is for developers who are going to be the ones consuming it, using it, looking for value from that tool. And if we instead say, we're going to roll out SAST by just looking for basic linting, or only this one particular vulnerability class, start to tune it, make sure it runs quickly, make sure it produces valid findings, very low false positives. That does start, I think, then to build that collaboration, that trust with the DevOps team. And that, I think, is one of the areas we're really trying to get to as we talk about this, and saying tools that aren't helping us build value, tools that aren't centering developers on this and what their needs are, those are the ones that are going to be the dying breed of tools. And the new future is just basically putting responsibility onto developers, but giving them the tools to be able to take that responsibility. And the defense rests at this point. I'm not sure. I don't need to belabor that point.
No, you summarized it really well. That's pretty much what we're trying to get to, but hopefully people get that message as well.
And it's hopefully the good message. And I think some of the other aspects too, it's talking about, we stepped into SCA. We talked a little bit about the cloud as well. And I want to just kind of expand the conversation a little bit into the cloud itself, because I'm curious, does cloud dealing with Lambdas, dealing with things like that, functions as a service. Are there certain things that you see that the cloud themselves, as we're approaching the design, the maintenance, the security, that are also causing either the role of security champions to change, SAST tools to change, or, if we go back to your budget for, 2022, are there also tools that are on your radar to help with the cloud security aspect of this?
That's an awesome question, because I think I feel like the cloud security the cloud service providers are an example where they can definitely do a lot more about doing security. Like, for example, have encryption of volumes by default. I don't have to tick a box to make an encryption happen. It should just happen. It should be there by default. Yes. Why am I even asking and reaching out to people to, hey, we should have a guardrail for encryption of our EBS volume? But I'm going to go a very different rabbit hole for that. But specifically talking about the compute, where Lambda functions and serverless is becoming a thing, I personally feel that's definitely hasn't really seen the maturity yet. The reason being, at the moment, the way people deal with this is they kind of have like an infrastructure security side for, these are my virtual machines, my EC2s and my containers and all that. That's kind of has been defined quite well. And like we have scanning tools for all kinds of things. When it comes to the serverless kind of world, where the line between infrastructure security and application security kind of blurs, because you're not really having much of a control from a cloud provider side. You do identity access management, you do some kind of like a endpoint network security kind of a thing. But beyond that, it's all application security. So you kind of not say, hey, we want to be a company which is fully serverless and not have an application security person in your team. Because then you're just going, okay, either the developer team may have some really great background in application security, or they probably heard this conversation that all three of us are having, and they have like some kind of lynching tool for known patterns to be kind of recognized and kind of looked for when they deploy, have a pull request, maybe depend about everything. They've got the whole thing going, but maybe that may be far from the reality. I feel if I have some budget for that, what people are going to recognize is hopefully the people who are trying to solve the serverless security challenges kind of pay some more attention to, why am I including a random library into my my Lambda function? So you can give me a pretty dashboard on whatever tool that I'm using to see what am I really calling. I personally don't feel that's that's a great way to do security in a Lambda function, because the point is not that you're trying to visualize in a dashboard how my Lambda function is calling all these different services. But instead, what you really want to know is the code that I wrote, because Lambda is technically on the internet, can someone use that and maybe piggyback on the permission that my Lambda function has to jump onto something else, maybe which is a production server. So I personally feel there's a lot more work still to be done. But if I have to spend money onto the cloud part of things, I think that's where I would have spent the money, but I'm still not satisfied with the kind of tooling that's available in the way they're doing it. Because imagine me coming to a developer and talking to them about the fact that, hey, you know what, from this point onwards, every time you write a Lambda function, just add this one line in there, which is importing a library, which is insert vendor here library, and that will be it. And what that also means is I'm logged in with that vendor, because if I have to take that code out, I have to change my entire code base for all the Lambda that I've written. Unlike the traditional cloud security that people have been talking about for a few years, where I have an IAM role, or it's just a role. If I don't like this particular vendor, I go to another vendor, I run a cloud formation, or I run some kind of automation, and it updates the role. Now, instead of vendor 1, I have vendor 2 from next year onwards. I can't do that for Lambdas or serverless functions in general. So that's my personal opinion on it's another murder. If I want to put down that path, that may be another one which is going to be hopefully not seeing the daylight for a long time if it continues like this.
It's funny, man, because like, excuse me, I laughed when you were saying part of that. But that's sort of exactly part of the problem. The last thing I should be doing is laughing, talking about AppSec. And I think I'm a little more biased than you on this. I don't think there's such thing as Lambda security. I think if you're a tool for Lambda security, I think it's really AppSec. But if we're at the state where you can't, some guy mentioned, you make a comment about AppSec like that, and I just laughed. That's the best response I have. That's not a good thing. And yeah, I think the way you say it, like, you have to actually modify the code, and I'm not as worried too much about having to pull out one vendor's tools and put another one in. I mean, that's still something, right? It's in your code. You want to be careful with it. But I think that's really sort of the best you can do right now. If you think about, I've been writing more Lambda probably since the last time we talked. There's a lot of repeated code across your Lambdas, right? Like the setup, the how to handle the requests you're getting from Lambda, the authentication, whatever you're doing. So I'd say probably a pretty good chunk of that code is really what the developer doesn't care about. They just want to have their actual business logic and whatever's going on underneath. So how can we make that stuff on top either easier to control or secure, or put like some sort of a bottleneck there on it? I don't want to just say move a firewall into the code itself, but yeah, it's. I agree with you. It still feels immature though.
Yeah, and that's what they've done though, because the library, what it's really doing is just capturing all the requests. So I love what you said, because I would technically call it like a serverless firewall, if I could use that word. Because if you kind of ask the vendors, what are they doing with that library? What it's truly just doing is trying to see what kind of calls are being made by a Lambda function. So it's not even looking at, but earlier Mike mentioned the linting pattern. It's not even doing that. Because we still have to kind of go down and make the developer do it in the pipeline, or at least when they're doing a pull request or committing their code. From a Lambda function by itself, the cloud service providers don't have a tool for it. They say, well, you can't even see what's running in the background. Don't worry about that. Shared responsibility, rah, rah, rah. And you go, oh yeah, shared responsibility. So high five, everyone. Let's go back home. So Amazon has taken care of this for us. But all of us security professionals would be realized, actually, I don't think that's why you want to go to serverless. Serverless just means you really need to hire an application security person who can teach people what needs to be done as well, because it's amazing from a cost-saving perspective. Maybe a bit harder, slightly harder from a compliance perspective, because how do you explain to a traditional SOC 2 person, hey, we're all Lambda, so there is no compute, so there is no antivirus. And I mean, that's a whole different rabbit hole. But keeping that aside, for just focusing on this particular one, I definitely feel as a concept, how to do serverless security, we still haven't figured that out. And maybe it could be the fact that we don't have that many serverless conversations going on. Recently, Cloud Security Alliance came out with their serverless security white paper, which had a lot of focus on Kubernetes security as well. I think I'm part of a team which is also doing a serverless white paper, security white paper for CNCF, Cloud Native Community, I think, Federation. Can't remember the name of it, but CNCF, if you guys are curious, that should come out later this year. But a lot of the conversations are all about the fact that how are we going to do security well in a way that, to what you just mentioned, that the developer doesn't have to think too much about it. It should just be like done somewhere above that layer where they're just putting their business logic through. And that's pretty much what they have to worry about.
And setting aside stumbling over acronyms is something we do all the time, but sharing information about security and strategic security is what we love to hear about from guests like you, Ashish. And this has been a wonderful segment, taking us on that journey about security champions, SAST, and getting value out of tools, especially here at the end, setting up perhaps a good challenge for some vendors to bring out some tools that can deliver value into securing Lambda. So I want to thank you for that.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
This was a great conversation with you once again. I want to thank John as well, and thank everybody who's been listening or hanging out in the Discord with us. If you'd like to learn more about Ashish's podcast, visit cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. And with that, we're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.